I think we're in a pretty good place with our boilerplate setup right now. We've got certainly some text showing up on the screen. I don't have any error messages, nothing like that. The one thing that we do still have to do is bring over our default components. So those reusable components that we've been taking from section to section. We'll do that in just a minute. For right now, let's focus a little bit more on our first challenge, which is the login form. So we're going to do a little bit of time travel for a minute and think back to the login form that we had created in that previous section. When we made it, we had 4 separate pieces of state inside that login form, right? We had the email, password, a loading Boolean, and the error message as well. So we definitely know that we're going to need to show a login form to the user so that they can sign into our application. The real question, the real challenge here is deciding whether or not we have to modify this thing to work in a Redux world. Okay, that's the big question. Do we need to modify this thing to work with Redux? So I want to just give you a very straightforward, very simple answer to that. One that maybe is a little bit surprising, I guess, coming from me. But I'm going to say, no, we don't have to. We don't. React can work without Redux. And we have absolutely seen that in the first 2 apps that we built in this course, right? Like, we made a login form. It worked. We didn't need Redux to do it. We are going to choose that, maybe it's going to make sense to refactor our application a little bit or refactor this login form to work with Redux because maybe it's going to make some more challenging aspects of the login form work a little bit more nicely, right? Or maybe as we start to increase the complexity of our application, maybe we're going to find that using Redux to manage our login form is actually going to be kind of a good idea. So again, I'm going to tell you, we don't have to do this. We're going to choose to do it because at some point in time, our application is probably going to grow in complexity, especially on the login side or the authentication side, and maybe keeping track of everything having to do with authentication in the Redux store is going to end up working to our advantage. So as we work throughout this application, we're going to see that rather than holding these pieces of Redux, or excuse me, these pieces of state at the component level, it actually starts to make a little bit more sense to hold them at the Redux level or the application state level. As we start to bring Redux into our application, and we're going to use it very heavily within this app here, we're going to learn that we start to move components, like the login form, away from very intelligent little pieces of software that know how to manage all these different pieces of state into very simple components that behave a lot more like templates, where they just take some amount of data and spit out some amount of JSX. All right, so that's kind of our end goal here. We want to pull as much logic and keeping track of state as possible away from the component level and push it to Redux instead. All right, so let's take a look at some diagrams. It's kind of going to explain or help us understand what the login form is going to be responsible for and what Redux is going to be responsible for. So this is what the login form is doing right now, or what it was doing previously. The login form would take an email and password, it would attempt to log in, and then it would produce a loading and error piece of state. And then we would figure out, hey, okay, is the user actually logged in? Do we need to show them an error message? Should we be showing them a spinner? Whatever it might be. So again, the login form was just generally very intelligent. Once we start to bring Redux onto the scene, however, this is the thought process that we want to have going through our head moving forward. We want to minimize the responsibilities of any one of our components. So the login form, rather than being in track of that big old flow of email, password, loading, error, all that stuff, we want to make the component as just simple and dumb as possible. So the login form, all it's going to do is show a form. Whenever a user types something like the email or the password, or they tap on a button, the login form will show an action creator. So we still do need that level of glue in there. We do still need to have the login form say like, oh, I just got tapped on, or a user just pressed a button. We still have to have that minimum amount of logic. But as far as deciding what to do about that tap or what to do about that email that was just entered, that is something that we're going to move off to being managed completely by Redux instead. So only when a user starts to tap on something or do something on the screen, that's when the login form says, okay, I need to respond to this in some fashion. We can't completely make the login form too dumb. All right, just one more diagram really quick. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the flow, generally how we want to treat Redux moving forward. So we're going to start at the very top and we're going to move down here. At the very top, React is watching for the user to do something, like tap on an element or type in some text. When the user does this, React is going to forward that event onto Redux. So again, this is the part where it's like, okay, we do have to have some minimum level of glue code in React. Like, we can't just be passing out JSX and not really thinking anything about it. We still have to use React for at least some level in here. But we are going to start to delegate everything, all the logic around deciding what to do about that event over to Redux instead. So when a user starts to tap something or type something, React is going to forward the event onto React is going to forward the event onto Redux, and then Redux is going to decide whether or not it needs to update its state in some fashion. After it makes that decision, it will push its state back over to React. So whatever new little piece of loading state or error state, it's going to push that over back to React, and then React is going to say, aha, some new state from Redux, I better re-render myself. And React is going to update the content on the screen and wait for the user to do something again. So our overall goal here, especially with the login form in mind, is to shift all of our record keeping, all the side effects, all the actually really doing something over to Redux, and we are only really going to depend on React for producing content on the screen and getting some notification about when a user does something. Okay, so this is how these two pieces fit together and how we're going to treat them moving forward. React is all about just showing something on the screen and watching for user events, whereas Redux is all about actually keeping track of the state of our application and deciding how to interpret or handle these events that are coming into our application. Okay, so with this kind of paradigm shift in mind, let's continue on to the next section and start wiring up our login form.